Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me for tea and chat on Tuesday, 15th of December. My name's Steph, so I normally work in Melksham Library, and I'm one of the Wiltshire Library team members who have really been enjoying sharing a number of poems and other extracts from books um, for the majority of this year because of as part of our response to COVID. But this month we wanted to take the time to thank many of our library volunteers. So these are volunteers who work across Wiltshire Council and the county, helping support the library service. And so we asked many of them for their favourite poems or suggestions that we wanted to dedicate to them throughout December at our tea and chats. So we already had Phil from Salisbury a couple of weeks ago, and we have another tea and chat next week from Trowbridge Library, and that'll be with Basil. But I'd say I'm in Steph. I have my coffee here in a suitable mug. It's actually got so on, but it's also got Father Christmas there, so looking very jolly. So this is a lovely mug. It's actually my husband's favourite mug, which he uses throughout the year. So it's not just for Christmas, this mug. So I've got my coffee. I hope you've got a nice drink too. And yeah, well, let's get started with our first request, which has come from Judith Hassey, who's a volunteer at Tisbury Library. And she's requested a poem by Robert Louis Stevenson. Obviously, he's famous for his novels like Treasure Island, Kidnapped, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but he also wrote a number of poems. And this is Wintertime, which is appropriate for December. Late lies the wintry sun of bed, a frosty, fiery, sleepy head blinks but an hour or two, and then a blood-red orange sets again. Before the stars have left the skies, at morning in the dark I rise, and shivering in my nakedness, by the cold candle bathe and dress. Close by the jolly fire I sit, to warm my frozen bones a bit, or with a reindeer sled explore the colder countries round the door. When to go out, my nurse doth wrap me in my comforter and cap. The cold wind burns my face and blows its frosty pepper up my nose. Black are my steps on silver sod, thick blows my frosty breath abroad, and trees and house and hill and lake are frosted like a wedding cake. And that was Wintertime by Robert Louis Stevenson. And that was requested by Judy Hassey from Tisbury, one of our volunteers. Now, our volunteers across Wiltshire County, they do have a number of roles to help us. Some of them come into our larger libraries to help out, and some of them are vital to keep our smaller libraries open. Some of them have more specialist roles, so might come in and give some IT help with some of our regular customers, or they might help run such groups as memory groups. There's a memory group at Salisbury, and other things, helping sometimes with children activities and rhyme time. So they're really vital, and it's a great time in December to thank them for all their support. Unfortunately, we normally would do a nice coffee morning for them in December, invite them all in, but of course we haven't been able to do that this year. So this is hopefully a next best thing. So moving on for our second request, and this is a request from Derek Monkton, who works at Lynham Library. It's actually just going to be a short extract because it's taken from a rather epic poem of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, which is a hugely long poem telling the experiences of a sailor who's returned from a long sea voyage. So I'm just going to take a short section from part one. And I think one of the interesting points, I think, for Derek from Lynham is that this poet, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, actually lived in Wiltshire for a short while in Calne, from 1814 to 1816, apparently in Church Street in Calne. So if anybody's listening from Calne, did you know that Samuel Taylor Coleridge lived there for a couple of years? So this is a short section from part 1 of the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. And now the storm blast came, and he was tyrannous and strong. He struck with his o'ertaking wings and chased us south along. With sloping masts and dipping prow, as who pursuit with yell and blow, still treads the shadow of his foe, and forward bends his head. The ship drove fast, loud roared the blast, and southward aye we fled. And now there came both mist and snow, and it grew wondrous cold, and ice mast high came floating by, as green as emerald. And through the drifts the snowy cliffs did send a dismal sheen. Nor shapes of men nor beasts we ken, the ice was all between. The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled like noises in a swound. Oh, that's just a short extract, but I'm feeling cold just reading it. And that was an extract from the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner by Samuel T Coleridge, and that's requested by Derek from Melksham Library. I think we need to warm up a bit after that cold, icy blast from the ancient Tale of the Ancient Mariner. So I'm going to move on. I'm actually now going to turn, and I'm going to read a shorter extract from the absolute classic, ever popular tale of the Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And he's one of the favourites of Brian Innes, who is a volunteer at Melksham Library. Brian's a star. He comes in weekly, or used to come in weekly. Hopefully he'll be back coming and joining us weekly in the near future. He's also one of our main Summer Reading Challenge volunteers. And he has come in and done some special children's storytime sessions because he loves reading out to children as well. So he volunteers in a number of roles. Then he requested that we could read an extract from A Christmas Carol. And I'm going to read the short extract, which is taken from The Home of Bob Cratchit. Such a bustle ensued that you might have thought a goose the rarest of all birds, a feathered phenomenon to which a black swan was a matter of course, and in truth it was something very like it in that house. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy, ready beforehand in a little saucepan, hissing hot. Master Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigour. Miss Belinda sweetened up the applesauce. Martha dusted the hot plates, and Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner at the table. And the two young Cratchits set chairs for everybody, not forgetting themselves, and mounting guard upon their post, crammed spoons into their mouths, lest they should shriek for goose before their turn came to be helped. At last the dishes were set on, and grace was said. It was succeeded by a breathless pause, as Mrs. Cratchit, looking slowly all along the carving knife, prepared to plunge it in the breast. But when she did, and when the long-expected gush of stuffing issued forth, one murmur of delight arose all around the board, and even Tiny Tim, excited by the two young Cratchits, beat on the table with the handle of his knife and feebly cried, "Hurrah!" There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavour, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet everyone had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witnesses. To take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody should have gone over the wall of the backyard and stolen it while they were merry with a goose, a supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hello, a great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper. A smell like a washing day. That was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other, with a laundress's next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute, Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with a pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazed in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and belike with Christmas holly stuck into the top. That was a short extract from A Christmas Carol from the kitchen of the Cratchit family, and I think that's warmed us up after the coldness of the ancient mariner. And that was a favourite from Brian, who's one of our volunteers at Melksham Library. We did have a number of other suggestions and requests of favourite poems from some of our other volunteers. I haven't got time to read some of them out, and some of them we're not allowed to read out for copyright reasons, but I do wanted to just include them anyway, just to mention. So again, one of our Melksham Summer Reading Challenge volunteers is Anne Doyle, and her two favourite poems at this time of year are Christmas by John Betjeman, and also Be Nice to You, You Turkeys This Christmas by Benjamin Zephaniah. So do check out those two poems if you're interested, and they're the favourites of Anne Doyle, who's a Summer Reading Challenge volunteer at Melksham. Another volunteer from Tisbury, Frank, really loves the poem Little Fish by Ronnie Barker, which is really funny. So do check that one out as well. I'm just going to do another short extract now, and this is from a home library service volunteer. So these are the volunteers who helped deliver resources and books to people across the county who are housebound. And this is the volunteer Susan Adams, who works out of Melksham Library, and she requested a short extract from The Village Christmas by Laurie Lee. It was from an essay entitled The Street Where I Grew Up. When I was 11, I wanted to learn the violin. There was a violin hanging on the kitchen wall, but no bow. Mother wrote to father asking if he could buy me a bow, but there was a very slow response. Meanwhile, I attended lessons, learning the fingering but without a bow. I still have my music teacher's report, which says, lack of a bow has spoilt Laurie's chances at playing the violin, which is rather like Nuriev's teacher writing on his report, lack of feet has spoilt his chances of becoming a dancer. That was just a very short extract from The Street Where I Grew Up, which is taken from Laurie Lee's Village Christmas, which I believe was one of our book choices on the Advent calendar of books, which has been posted on our Facebook pages. So do check Laurie Lee's Village Christmas out if you'd like some more of her writings. Just thanks for your comments. I've had a couple of comments in the message bar. That's great. Thanks, Philip. I'm glad you like my hat. And thanks, Rebecca. Scott, I'm glad you enjoyed the reading so far. Now, I've had a couple of short poems. I'm going to turn back to poems. I have a few extracts. I'm turning back to poems. Where's my other book from? Now, these are two poems that have been requested by our volunteers, and both of them, something in common, is that they're actually, we're not quite sure who wrote them. So they're both just have anonymous as their creator, the writer. The first one is a request from Amanda Proctor, who works at Tisbury Library, and she's requested this one. It's not particularly, it's not a Christmas or winter poem as such, but it's quite an amusing one, and I've got it here in my book of comic poems. And it's called On a Tired Housewife. Here lies a poor woman who was always tired. She lived in a house where help wasn't hired. Her last words on earth were, dear friends, I am going to where there's no cooking or washing or sewing. For everything there is exact to my wishes. For where they don't eat, there's no washing of dishes. I'll be where loud anthems will always be ringing, but having no voice, I'll be quit of the singing. Don't mourn for me now, don't mourn for me never. I am going to do nothing forever and ever. And that's on a Tired Housewife, and that was requested by Amanda Proctor from Tisbury Library. This poem actually makes me think of, I don't know whether you remember the sitcom Butterflies. This is going back to my childhood. The family, it was a dentist, wasn't it? Was it Robert Palmer and Wendy Craig? Of course, they had a housekeeper, their cleaner, and she was always very tired. And this poem always makes me think of her. I think her dream was to take some sleeping pills and just sleep all day. So that's on a Tired Housewife, and it makes me think of the character from Butterflies. The other poem I'm going to share with you now is a Christmas poem. It's The Donkey's Christmas, and this has been requested by Gail Pearce, who's a volunteer at Devises Library. And this is a really sweet little poem. Again, we're not sure who wrote it, but it's a popular one. It could be for many a year. The Donkey's Christmas. Plodding on from inn to inn, no room to spare. No room but a stable bare. We rest, and the following morning Jesus is born. I gaze on the wondrous sight. The King is born, the King in a stable. I see great lights, lights that are angels. Everyone comes to see this sight. I carried Mary, Holy Mary, last night. That's The Donkey's Christmas, and that was requested by Gail Pearce, who works at Devises Library. I really like that poem. It's quite. I've not actually read it before. The first time I've actually seen it myself. So many poems about, aren't they? But I really like that one. I really like the pacing of it. And you can just, the donkey is a lovely creature. It's my husband's favourite animal, the donkey. So that's one of his. I must read that to him later. So we've had a number of requests from our lovely volunteers across the county, but this final extract I'm going to read for you today, I'm going back to another extract, is actually a suggestion from our library stock manager. So this is from Jess Phillips, and she suggested this extract from Kenneth Grahame's book. So this is from The Wind in the Willows, and it's actually a section of Carols at Mole's End. The first extract we had was from A Christmas Carol, which was all to do the food of Christmas. But this one, as the name suggests, Carols at Mole's End, is to do the music of Christmas, and they're my two favourite things of Christmas: all the lovely food and all the music. So this is a short extract, as suggested by Jess Phillips, our stock manager. It's by Kenneth Grahame. Sounds were heard from the forecourt without, sounds like the scuffling of small feet in the gravel and a confused murmur of tiny voices, while broken sentences reached them. Now all in line, hold the lantern up a bit, Tommy. Clear your throats first, no coughing after I say 1, 2, 3. Where's young Bill? Here, come on, do. We're all awaiting. What's up? Inquired the rat, pausing in his labours. I think you must be the field mice, replied the mole, with a touch of pride in his manner. They go round carol singing regularly at this time of the year. They're quite an institution in these parts, and they never pass me over. They come to Mole End last of all, and I used to give them hot drinks and supper too sometimes, when I could afford it. It would be like old times to hear them again. Well, let's have a look at them, cried the rat, jumping up and running to the door. It was a pretty sight, and a seasonable one, that met their eyes when they flung the door open. In the forecourt, lit by the dim rays of a horn lantern, of some 8 or 10 little field mice stood in a semicircle, red worsted comforters round their throats, their forepaws thrust deep into their pockets, their feet jiggling for warmth. With bright, beady eyes, they glanced shyly at each other, sniggering a little, sniffing and applying coat sleeves a good deal. And as the door opened, one of the elder ones that carried the lantern was just saying, "Now then, 1, 2, 3, and forthwith the shrill little voices uprose on the air, singing one of the old-time carols that their forefathers composed in fields that were fallow and held by frost, or when snowbound in chimney corners, and handed down to be sung in the miry street to lamp-lit windows at Yuletide." They then proceeded to sing the carols, and then the voices ceased. The singers, bashful but smiling, exchanged sidelong glances, and silence succeeded, but for a moment only. Then from up above and far away, down the tunnel they had so lately travelled, was borne to their ears in a faint musical hum the sound of distant bells ringing a joyful and clangorous peal. "Very well sung, boys," said the rat heartily. "And now come along in, all of you, and warm yourself by the fire and have something hot." That was a short extract from Carols at Merle's End by Kenneth Grahame, and that was suggested by Just Flip, our stock manager. So I just want to finish off with one other Christmas poem now. This is one that I've chosen because I like this one. I heard this read out, I think, at the Bath Abbey a number of years ago at some carol concert, and it's a lovely one. So this is, I'm going to finish with A Visit from St Nicholas, which is by Clement, Clarke, Moore. "'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St Nicholas soon would be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from my bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave a lustre of midday to objects below. When what to my wondering eyes did appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment he must be Saint Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, oh Comet, oh Cupid, oh Donner and Blitzen. To the top of the porch, to the top of the wall, now dash away all. As leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with a sleigh full of toys and St Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, and turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose, and given a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." And that was a visit from St Nicholas by Clement Clarke. Well, I hope you enjoyed our festive wintry Christmas selection and some other poems, and most of them chosen by our wonderful volunteers from across Wiltshire County. As I said, we have another selection of readings for you next week on Tuesday the 22nd, and that will be coming from Trowbridge Library, and that will be with Basil from Trowbridge. So we've actually managed to fit in an extra one this month. I hope you've enjoyed that. Do let us know if there's any particular poems that you really have enjoyed reading, or any extracts. And if you've got any favourite poems and suggestions for going ahead into the next year. We're not quite sure what's going to happen next year. We're hoping to start opening our libraries again and increasing our opening hours. But of course, there's still some things that we still don't know exactly how are going to pan out over the next few months. So we may well be still doing these tea and chat sessions. And so we'd love to hear any comments or suggestions from you all. But for now, it's a goodbye from me. I'll finish off my coffee now. I've not got a biscuit, but I do have a nice chocolate that I'm going to now have. So enjoy your rest of your day, and I hope you have a good few days leading up, and then of course with Christmas this week. Do check out Basil's poems next Tuesday. Thanks. Take care.